Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Gary Marcinini, the Dean of the School of Information and Library Science, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the 11th Annual Kilgour Lecture. This lecture was funded by OCLC, the largest bibliographic database used in the world, and it was established in honor of Fred Kilgour on the occasion of his 90th birthday. Fred was a distinguished visiting professor here for about 15 years almost, and spent time at SILS and inspired us all. He was writing papers well into his 90s, so that's an inspiration. OCLC is proud to have this lecture annually. We typically have it in the spring, and we're fortunate that Professor Ben Shneiderman has agreed to be our Kilgour lecturer this year. Ben is a distinguished professor in the school, in the Computer Science Department at the University of Maryland. He's the founder of the Human-Computer Interaction Laboratory, which is arguably one of the top human-computer interaction labs in the world. Ben is truly one of the father figures in HCI. He wrote a book, was it the late 70s actually? The Software Psychology?
1980.
1980. I sort of somehow stumbled upon this book, and I thought, wow, this is interesting. This is somebody who's dealing with algorithms and programming, but actually from the human side. And and so I started paying attention to him, and it was my great pleasure to get to know him and work with him over the years. But his accolades go on and on. He's a member of the National Academy of Engineering. He's a fellow of all the great 3- and 4-letter organizations. It's on your program, AAAS and so on. He is one of certainly the most highly cited computer scientists in the world, and probably the most highly cited human-computer interaction professor. He has several special qualities that endear him to anybody who knows him, and that's that even though he's a first-rate computer scientist, he really likes people. And not only does he really like people, he likes art, and he likes all of the expressions of humanity that make life worth living. And so it's especially appropriate that he has written this book, The ABCs of Research, that begins to sort of elevate the kinds of things that I think all of us think about outside of our day-to-day particular research scholarly activities. And so it's my great pleasure to turn it over to Ben.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
for
you,
being
Gary.
here.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here at UNC. I mean, nice introduction like that makes it worth the trip alone. And appreciate many of you came to my morning talk, which is a more technical talk about our work on event and analytics for electronic health records. This talk's a very different beast. But first, my comments about Gary. Now, Gary, oh, that's my phone. So, Gary was a colleague, a dear colleague at the University of Maryland for many years, and I went back and took a look, and we wrote 10 papers together. And where did I? Oh, there we go. All right. Whoops. Wait. Oh dear, now I lost it.
Ooh, I left the first one.
Well, yeah, there we go. I gave it all away. All right. Why did it hit that? Okay. I got it. Still. Come on. There we go. Anyway, so we did 10 papers together, and maybe the most well-known one is this one from 1988, where this is 88, when, remember the manifesto for the web that Tim Berners-Lee wrote was spring 89. So well before that, we had already been working on early hypertext systems like the one Hypertize that we developed, and Gary had worked on other encyclopedia with Jeff Crane and the Which project? What's it called?
Perseus.
Perseus Project, of course, at Tufts. And so we were natural to pair up and to begin thinking and describing this larger world, this new world, this coming world of how what was then called hypertext would influence the way we all come to know the world around us. So it was a wonderful time and a great partnership. Gary's students were active users of our software, Hypertize, showing what was wrong with it, finding the bugs, making it better, making feature requests, and they did some creative things that my students would never have done, like the famous disc about who killed Gary Marcianini, a hypertext mystery disc, which will allow you to explore and find the answer to the day's important questions. And that was the punchline there that got revealed of Gary's handsome-looking beard, and then the two of us there, and his Sullenberger look right now sort of is an evolution from this happy days. So, as Gary said, HCIL at Maryland is my happy place of interdisciplinary collaborations. It's jointly run by computer science and the wonderfully vibrant iSchool at Maryland, and also these other groups, psychology, sociology, and the wonderfully titled Maryland Institute for Technology and Humanities, MITH. And the website, I hope you'll visit, has 800 tech reports, 200 videos, and lots more that you'll find interesting. Okay? Hope some of you know me from the book. I mean, software psychology was the way I first took my bridging of the psychology to the world of technology design, and I evolved down that path, and by '86 I wrote the book, the first edition, Design and User Interface, and just did finish the sixth edition, which now has 6 co-authors to get it all right, to tell the remarkable evolution of HCI, kind of technology, the research, the theories, the principles, the guidelines that make it possible for 7 billion people to use one of these things that's in their pocket. And so it's a great satisfaction to have seen that evolution. I've worked on lots of other things, especially information visualization. That was this morning's talk. But today is this talk in this special place here. This is quite inspirational. And, you know, I want to take a larger view of the trends in research, directions, and this book has dual purposes. The first is as a guide to students. So for those of you who are doing PhDs or undergraduate work, or who are young professors and pushing forward, this is a message about how to have high-impact research in the existing research ecosystem. Okay? So there's lots of advice there. And in between, it also has the spirit of saying the current research ecosystem is filled with problems brought from old ways of thinking, and that there are new ways to reconfigure this research ecosystem so that it can produce the kind of results we want. Okay? That's a powerful thing. So the other message is for senior academic researchers, and administrators, business leaders. There's a strong unit, a strong component of this to talk about how to work with industry, civic partners, government, and global partners as well. And then the last part, last week on Wednesday, I spoke at the National Science Foundation, and that was very satisfying, and they were quite vigorous in their support, which very much pleased me. I've spoken at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, so I'm trying to make my way around to that circle and to places here. I appreciate that Gary has done much and has taken this up with great enthusiasm. As you may know, I was supposed to be here in the spring, but I got sick, and he had bought a bunch of books which he gave to the deans around campus and to the advisory board. So I've returned here, and here's the mug for the book. That's yours, Gary. And thank you for your support for this wild idea. Well, maybe not so wild, as I hope to show. So the story goes back that my training, and maybe many of you also, was dramatically influenced by the writings of Vannevar Bush. Vannevar Bush was a famous electrical engineer, built analog computers in the 30s, an MIT professor, and in World War II he came to Washington, D.C. to be Franklin Delano Roosevelt's science advisor. And as the war was coming to an end in 1945, Roosevelt instructed him to write a manifesto about how research would be done in the years after the war. And this is a famous and very readable, about 80-page piece called Science, the Endless Frontier, a great title. Science, The Endless Frontier. Okay? In that book, Vannevar Bush wrote about how research, and in those days research was science, okay, should be done. You begin with basic, pure research. Then you go to applied research. You look for commercial opportunities, and you develop the commercial product. This so-called linear approach, from basic research to applied research to developing products and then marketing them, is widely cited, is very much embedded in the way we teach, the way we learn, the way government agencies fund research, the way the Defense Department has 6.1, 6.2, 6.3 funding organized around that theme. It's a compelling model. It's simple, it's clear, and it just seems to be a great idea. The only problem is it rarely works. Now, others have pointed out the failures of this idea and the fact that it was not the way research succeeded, nor was it the best way to organize research. And starting in the 70s, there were loud and vigorous articles complaining about this. Tom Allen's book, Managing the Flow of Information Technology, said, you know, this doesn't sound like the way I see information technology developing. It often develops because there's a need somewhere, that industry has a problem, and then the researchers address it, okay? And one after another, the critics arose, okay? And those who analyzed even basic science, like Nobel Prizes in physics, that's basic science, isn't it? Well, Arno Penzias at Bell Labs and Robert Wilson get the Nobel Prize for discovering the background radiation cosmic Big Bang. Pretty good stuff, but as the analysts have shown, actually that was done as an applied project for Bell Laboratories. They were supposed to find the ways to make microwave communications more effective, and whatever they did, there was this background noise in the system, and they get the Nobel Prize. Even the transistor, 1947, a Bell Labs project, was designed for a practical need to replace the error-prone vacuum tubes with a more reliable circuit system. And they invented the transistor, and only after they invented the transistor did they discover the transistor effect. And again, even in Vannevar Bush's book, the chapters alternate with his admiration for the medical researchers during World War II who made such dramatic advances in medical science because they were working on tropical diseases, new kinds of injuries, new kinds of treatments, antibiotics. And again, the evidence keeps popping up to me and others that, you know, really the way to get big research breakthroughs is to work on real problems. Donald Stokes writes a famous book in the mid-90s, now shaping this idea, wonderful and readable book called Pasteur's Quadrant. And his description, very elegantly, is of Pasteur as the poster child. Pasteur worked on the problems of fermentation of wine gone bad and the spoilage of milk. And what does he get? He gets the germ theory of disease. And he fixes the milk production, he fixes the wine production, and he gets vaccinations. Pretty good payoff for that. So Donald Stokes' book makes this quadrant of what he called use-inspired basic research. Okay, a real problem, take it basic. Now, Stokes was clever enough to say, hey, there are other ways. You don't always have to do this. After all, Niels Bohr was not working on any apple. He was looking at the structure of the nucleus and trying to understand how the protons all fit together, and he got somewhere. Thomas Edison was not a theory-driven guy, not a basic researcher. He just turned out 1,060 patents. Okay, so there's other ways to work, we know, but the evidence was growing and the commentators were sort of assembling to say that the greatest potential for high payoff, high impact research is if you work on a real problem, you take a theoretical stance, you look at it and study it with the idea of finding generalizations that work, you test it with your real-world partners. You really own up. No toy problems, no synthetic data. You get out there, if you really believe you have an idea, you test it. And then you come back, refine your theory, you publish the theory, and you disseminate the solution. That's the twin win. That's what I'm after here. And that's what I've come to see, and what I'm advocating is shifting the way we teach our students, the way we do our work, the way we reward our faculty, the way we promote people, to see how much benefit they can bring while they're publishing great papers. That sounds like a lot to ask for, but I think I'm going to lay out the story. I hope you'll see you can do this too, okay? So here's we go. I suggest 3 things have changed since the days of Vannevar Bush, which is why we need a new manifesto, okay? The first thing that's changed is the kind of problems of the 19th and 20th century were very different. They were science. They were reductionist model. They could be done in a laboratory environment with controlled studies, okay? That is what we think of science. Thomas Kuhn, Structure of Scientific Revolutions in 1960, laid that out. That's what science was. That's what research was, okay? And that reductionist model, strong and powerful, the scientific method, elegant and fruitful, needs to be continued. However, there are new ways of looking at the immense problems of the 21st century. By that I mean healthcare delivery, okay? You need to know how to do that. Community safety, environmental sustainability, energy preservation, terrorism, cyber terrorism. There's a whole set of complex issues that we look at that are on the national agenda. And if we're going to address those, I would say we need more than just science. We need fresh ways of thinking, because these are largely socio-technical systems. That's the difference. They cannot be studied in a laboratory. They do not adhere to reductionist thinking. They're highly dependent on contextual efforts. They're wicked problems, and they're interwoven with deep issues of human performance, human persuasion, motivation, incentives, reward structures. So the game theory people started from some abstract mathematics, Morgenstern and von Neumann. They were getting there because they understood. They were trying to make an abstracted mathematical model, but they got to the idea these were systems in which persuasion, motivation, incentives, and rewards were the central levers in making a success story. Okay? So the problems are bigger and very different. We need new ways of thinking. Secondly, the good news is we have very much more powerful technologies, especially the web and the capacity for collaboration through web-based connections. So the web lets you get previous results of information, learn about people, learn about laboratories, find out who might be collaborators, ask questions, post partial results, develop collaborations, and then tell your story. Okay? Now this reflects the very different way researchers get their information. 30 years ago, average researcher read 175 papers a year. This is Carol Tenopier's work, okay? 175 papers a year, mostly from 6 or 8 paper journals that they subscribed to and got in their office, and they flipped through them, okay? And that's pretty much the world that's gone. And the average researcher now reads about 400 papers a year, and those come from a much more diverse collection of papers, and they come by social media recommendations, emails, listservs, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, etc., and the capacity now for us to click a button and get that is remarkable. When my students and I are off on some new direction, I realize I get this on. Did I not get this on for you? Sorry. Oh dear. Oh dear. Now that's not good either, is it? Hello. Hello? I got it. Okay. Sorry about that. The reading styles of researchers is vastly different, and they get these notifications, and then they can track things down. As my students and I get to work on some new topic, in 3 hours, we know what the top 10 papers are and who the top 10 researchers are, and we're sending an email to say, have you thought about this? We have an idea. Can you steer us? You have a new paper. And so that world is very different. It's collegial, it's network-based, it's interactive, it's live, it's quick, it's hours or, days. Whereas some of you may remember the days when we got a postcard in the mail and we asked, would you please send me a reprint of your paper from a year ago from this paper journal? And we'd go to a copy machine, or we had bought the reprints, the preprints, and then we would mail it out to them. And it's really a very different pulse and pace to what is happening now in these worlds. So the new, and I should say the visual technologies, the YouTube, information visualization, capacity to show things, to let me show you what my experimental rig looks like, let me show you how this works, let me show you the video of what happened. And so it's a really different space. And again, we need to teach our students, your students, and when they're doing a semester project as a team, I hope, and they're producing a written report, my students have to produce a written report, ACM conference format. They have to have a slide deck with the explanation. They have to have a demo online, and they have to publish a 3 to 5 minute video on YouTube. Not just internally, but they have to put it out there, okay? So they have to get out there, and they have those skills. I don't teach how to make videos. I just say, you will make one. And they know, someone knows how to do it, or they learn how to do it. And that's what I expect students to be able to pick up. Okay, number 3 is the raised ambition. 30 years ago, a medical study might be 800 subjects at a single university hospital, given treatment protocols and report by a group from that university hospital. Now, it's 10 university hospitals around the world, each with 800 patients, and you get to scale up and scale out and try it out in different circumstances and see how it works. So the papers are more ambitious. There's much more expected to get a published paper. The quality of papers, I would say, in general, is higher than it used to be. Okay? Now, that all fits together because not only raised ambitions, but raised expectations. The NSF program managers I spoke to last week are really expecting a lot when you do a 1-year or 2-year or 3-year grant. And so there's a greater pressure, but we can do it because we can form teams and work together in ways we never could before. If we have time, we'll go on to there's a whole discussion of teamwork, but teamwork, 90% of all science papers in Web of Science are teamwork, not single author. That's dramatically different from 30 years ago when it was about 55% teams and 45% individual authors. Here's one little factoid. In astronomy, up to 1965, the largest number of authors on a paper was 8. Okay? And now some astronomy papers have 1,000 co-authors. Right? They're rare and they sort of draw a lot of attention, but the Large Hadron Collider, the Genome paper, all have hundreds of authors, and it's a very different world that you can draw together teams if you've got the skills to do it. And we'll talk a little bit about it. Okay, so this is what I see as different, and I've struggled for a few years during writing this book and rewriting it and revising it in trying to distill a couple of guiding principles, and here they are. So the first one is the title of the book. It's ABC, and it says Applied and Basic Combined. That's what I was conveying before. Work on a real problem, bring a theoretical approach to it, test your theory with your real-world collaborators, bring it back, refine it, publish the academic results, disseminate the solution. That is a big strategy, and that tends to drive higher quality and higher impact by almost all the measures for it. I tried in the book to be as much evidence-based as possible. So some people think this is tough to do, and it may be. It requires maybe teams of people. It may new collaborations. Collaboration with business and civic partners, with global partners, with NGOs, with somebody who's got a real problem. And you bring your theory and your academic training and methods to look at that, that real problem. And that's a really powerful combination. And you want to go both ways. And I'll describe a little bit more about how that gets done. The second part of this was maybe less elegantly crafted, but it's the SED principle of science, engineering, and design. And that was a shift in my own life and the shift I saw in the world, because I was raised as a science student and did physics at Brookhaven National Laboratories, bubble chamber physics when there were bubble chambers. And that's how I got into programming, writing 3D track reconstruction for bubble chamber pictures. And so the shift from science to, Gary said, I'm a member of the National Academy of Engineering. How'd that happen, right? And, you know, my book is called, did you catch it? Designing the User Interface. So somehow those components had emerged over time, and I began to realize how this is working together. Okay? Now, science is, again, as I said, the old way of thinking was science was research, discovery of new knowledge. And in fact, you know, the National Academy of Sciences was founded in 1863 by Abraham Lincoln. Okay? National Academy of Engineering was founded in 1964, 100 years later. Okay? So that tells you the post-war movement that engineering became a research method, which I'll come to in a moment. And the National Academy of Design was founded in, that's a trick question, there is none. I propose by 2064 we get to do that, because I see design as this emerging discipline, as I'll come to say. So science has the scientific method, engineering has the engineering method, but it's pretty hard to find coherent descriptions of what it is. But as I piece together in some of these deeper discussions of engineering, there's a whole chapter about what is science, what is engineering, and what is design. So engineering has the idea of you have a goal, you have metrics, and you build small prototypes, and you scale up and you scale out. You keep measuring, you keep refining, you iterate, and you progressively get closer to your goal. They also have very deep principles of modular design. That is a very important part to enable rapid improvements of components. So that was where the methods of engineering. But the methods of design are still being formulated. Design thinking, IDEO, talks about this, Rhode Island School of Design, RISD, SCAD, OCAD, Stanford D School, one after another you find people, and there are a dozen different ones that I try to give honor to, but they pretty much start with a kind of rebellious attitude that says, we will question the goal, and then we will question the methods to get there, and question the requirements. So it starts, and usually called brainstorming, but a rather divergent process of trying to consider all the stakeholders and understand their needs and talk to them. And it often invokes the word empathy, something you generally won't get in the engineering or science communities. Admittedly, there's overlap among these, and many engineers would say design is part of engineering. Dan Mote, the president of the National Academy of Engineering, says that. And indeed, circuit design, chip design, structural design for buildings are part of engineering, but there are important fields of design, of product design, commercial design, social design, which are kind of outside the usual bounds of engineering. And the design community has developed this divergent approach and then converge. And then convergent approach to setting goals, and then, okay, there we go, thank you. And then there'll be a second phase, and once you decide on the goals, you diverge again to think about the methods to achieve the goal, and then you converge again. This is usually known as the double diamond approach, and it's one of the things I talk about. I think it's a rather positive thing. In the science world, if you read the papers in science, and many have criticized this, that they tend to suggest this reductionist, lucid, evolution towards, towards making an experiment, a clear hypothesis, you test it, and you're done. In fact, many people comment it doesn't really happen that way in science either, but scientists don't like to talk about that. They don't like to talk about their failures. They don't like to talk about the pilot studies or things that are done. And I just see that, and my scientist friends confirm that they don't talk about the way they scaled up their little experiments on mice and chimps. They just talk about the human experiment. There's a whole process there that has many engineering and sometimes design aspects. So there can be crossover, but I would say it's important that we understand what is the scientific method, what is the engineering, and what is design, and that we teach it to our students. Okay? So how do we give students the experience of design? Maryland has a week doesn't have a design school. It has a fine arts department that has some interactive media people in it. And, I think finding the connections, you have a better model from Carnegie Mellon, which has a strong design school, and RISD and, these other places have a strong, and the Stanford D School is a worthwhile. And I give a bunch of examples in the book to try to talk about what is design. So I was, getting worked up about this idea of science, engineering, and design, but I wasn't sure. And I thought I'd try to see, was there evidence? I was always looking for evidence that design was coming up in the world as an important topic, as important as science or engineering. So I went to the Google Ngrams website to look at the 20 million books that Google scanned in English. And they allow you to search historically for the frequency of various words. Not a bad idea. So I did it, and here's what I got. So here's engineering from 1900 to 2000. It sort of wiggles and increases. Science wiggles, maybe a bump in the 30s and a bump in the space race days of science. But look at that. Design keeps going, and in 1975 it becomes the dominant topic. That was kind of a surprise to me. And it wasn't all Steve Jobs and Johnny Ive. They were sort of part of that movement, but it preceded them. And that was sort of interesting. So I still wasn't convinced enough that I could base the book or a chapter on this. And then about a year and a half later, the New York Times put up its chronicle database of every article in the New York Times. So I'll do the same thing. Let's see what they say. And now I got the same, similar. Engineer wiggles around, scientist wiggles around, designer in 1975 crosses over. 2 data points is a lot stronger. I became more confident, and these 2 figures are in the book. And so I felt it worthwhile to reach a little and suggest that design could be as important a method, not in just making commercial products and iPhones, but in discovering new knowledge and invention. Okay? So engineering had made that transition in the years after World War II, after Vannevar Bush. Okay? The engineers certainly think they're doing basic research and publishing fundamental, foundational, important results. And so the same thing I allege or hope will happen in the design community. Now, I have resistance to this in the design community, which, they sometimes will say, my design speaks for itself. My design is my theory. I don't have to write about it. And I disagree. I think you owe it to us to tell us where you got your ideas from, what you were inspired by, what you're trying to accomplish, why this is important, and where it's going from here. So there is, to me, a way to write about and talk about these things that I want them to learn, and I want the scientists and the engineers to appreciate the power and value of design. Maybe I should take a little breath here. These are 2 controversial principles. Maybe I'll just put it out here and just ask if any challenges or questions about ABC or SED. Shocked you all. Thank you, Paul.
I spent last week with another design office, a CMU design school. And one of the things that she and other designers were lamenting is that design thinking was being captured from the design school where it belonged, being taken into the business.
Shocking.
Exactly.
Yes. Well, indeed.
And also they thought they were deforming it as something too practical and not creative.
It's
How do you see that? Because we see they, of course, John, the abundance of other changing the world.
yeah. Any new field, as I saw with HCI or visualization, has turmoil, has competing forces who all want to be the heroes of this, and eventually there's a synthesis that works together. So, there are different arguing schools of design, like, Stanford D School, IDEO on the West Coast, you have the East Coast. But they're right, they should consider a success story that business has gone down the road of design. And it's not just Apple, or Samsung or so on, but, IBM Watson is selling themselves because they have 25 design studios around the world. That's how they're going. Because they think they need to work with their customers to design the way they'll use Watson. Okay, and design is a hot word. Look in the Harvard Business Review in the last 2 years. Every month or every other month there's an article about how design thinking will change your company and save it from this or that. And so there are powerful forces. There are many who are seeking the leadership of it, and it's still to emerge, which is why I think it's going to take another 50 years to get to a consensus about what is design, what are the research methods, how do we do it rigorously, okay, and how do we report it. So stick around, that's where we're going, but I would say it's certainly high time to think about the teaching of our classes. We teach design, that we teach teamwork, that we give them the experience of working that, and the idea of designing something new, not just studying what is, okay? I want more. I had a colleague in Michigan. He was very proud that he had set up for this school kids to study the pollution in the stream that ran by the school. And I said, that's fine, but I want you to do more than study it. I want you to fix it. I mean, make it a project to clean up the stream. Find out who's polluting it, where the trash is coming, get it picked up, find out who's responsible, get the state legislature involved, get the city commissioners to allocate funds, get it done. You know, so I think action-oriented research is sometimes called. But I think authentic projects in the real world where you bring social benefit during the semester and hopefully endures beyond the semester. That's a pretty high push, but I think you can do it. And it doesn't always work when I've done it, but it does work enough times to keep me saying, this is good. Now, I talk about this in my class. Well, I have a slide later, but of the way that I think about it, people seem to like this idea that projects in my class have 2 parents and 3 children. Okay? The 2 parents are a real problem that somebody outside the classroom has, and a real theory that I can apply. A cognitive theory, a perceptual theory, a social theory, a motivational theory, whatever. Okay? And I run my project and I get a refinement to the theory, I get a solution to the problem, and the 3rd child is guidance to the future workers on this kind of project. And that's a simple way of framing it. Students seem to like that idea. And the idea that it is doing theory and it is doing practice. I think young people these days, they actually do want to make a difference. They want to be engaged, and they want to be treated as adults, not, not being taught something which may not be valuable. Okay, you want to reply to that, or anybody else? Yeah, thank you.
You're also talking about something that's important that seems to, our society seems to be trending away from, and that's civil responsibility, and also, social consciousness.
Those are big words. I don't want to go too far, but yes, I mean, that's maybe my vision of the world and what I think would be building a better world, of giving students and young leaders of the world a chance to help make it a better place and to wrestle with how difficult that is, and to understand that making change is not a matter of an experiment in a lab, but it's a matter of getting people to adopt new ways of recycling paper, of keeping the water clean, of fighting health problems, all right? And that,
Things into just making money.
or just making money. Now, what, as you'll come to in a minute, but I think working with companies is a dangerous and problematic exercise, but a very powerful and effective one that I want to advocate. So the book goes on with 5 chapters about how to do this, and the first is how to choose problems. I mean, there's very weak literature that tells students how to choose problems. Peter Medawar, the British Nobel biologist, wrote a wonderful book called Advice to a Young Scientist, in which he says, don't choose piffling problems. And it's often quoted. He doesn't tell us what he means by that, but piffling is sort of a Britishism that talks about small, insignificant. Work on something big. Well, that's what I'm talking about here. But there are now science roadmaps, grand challenge websites. The National Academy of Engineering has 16 grand challenges. Go take a look at that. I just a week ago published in the ACM Interactions a 2-pager which has 16 grand challenges for HCI. Okay, and take a look. You may disagree, you may others, but I want to encourage a discussion about what are the grand challenges of our age. How do we formulate problems that will guide ourselves, our young researchers, and our students? So I think that's a worthwhile thing. There are various real challenges out there with dollars behind it. There's movements like Innocentive website. Companies post challenges and offer $20,000 or $200,000. And then solvers, of which I'm signed up as one for half a million of us have signed up. And they work on these problems, and if they solve it, they get their $20,000 or $200,000. I think most instructive is to read the Innocentive white paper about how to write a problem description so that it captures the essence of the problem, but does not use technical jargon and allows people in neighboring fields to come in and be active players. And it's a great success story, okay? Their government also does do challenges. Peter Orzag, 7 years ago, put out this paper about how agencies can do challenges. Okay? So second is the methods then. And the traditional controlled experimental studies, the reductionist model, are still good, but we want to go more than that. You want to do better than that. You want to talk about interventions in the real world. Look what's happened in business again, the idea of A/B testing. Ron Kochavi at Microsoft may be most well known for this, but Netflix, Amazon, eBay have all done this. How do you decide about the website design? You don't run a usability study with 20 subjects or 60 subjects. What you do is you design 2 versions of the website, one with big pictures of the books and the other one with longer text blocks about the books. And you put them up and you get, over 2 weeks, 10,000 users with one version, 10,000 users with another version, and then you see how many books you sell. Okay, this kind of A/B testing is the prevalent way of doing it. Kochavi calls these experiments, and I quibbled with him. I think they're interventions because they're at scale, they're real world. They don't have laboratory controls, but he's, fair to claim that they're kind of controlled. He tries to make, statistical sampling that gives a accurate rendition. But Microsoft has 200 of these running on any given day. Okay, and so do a lot of the other companies. So you can make interventions in the real world, and the gift of all these technologies and these guys is that you can collect huge volumes of real data from real users online in real time. It's just pretty amazing. Why should you waste your time on a laboratory study when you could get out there in the real world with real users, okay, and potentially produce benefit to them during the experiment and have the validity being much higher. Now, also having the real world gives you the chance to try out in different contexts, and so this scaling up to bigger and scaling out to different circumstances is another important part of this. Okay? The biggest chapter and the most well-documented one is about teamwork. This is, I think, the big shift. Now, many of you probably already work in teams or are in classroom projects that depend on teamwork. But I'm trying to make my colleagues at Maryland more readily have teamwork projects. There are all kinds of reasons they object to it. They think there's all kinds of problems they think, but I think it's advantageous to do it for our students. And also, I think it's less work for the faculty member, and it's more interesting work. I love working with my students on their projects, and teams of 4 or 5 typically, and they get something substantive done, and we often publish a paper based on that, which is, really nice for them and for me. I'd rather read 10 papers from team projects than 40 or 50 individual papers, and I like the diversity of mix, so I think it's a powerful way. I also teach my students how to work in teams, and they don't know. And I was inspired to do this by visiting General Electric, which at one point was hiring a lot of our students. And after spending a few hours with them, I asked, what do you think of our students? And he said, your students are great, but they don't know how to work in teams. It was a direct quote, okay? And that changed me. And I was determined then, and several of my colleagues are also, and we're having a meeting in computer science to talk about how to do more teamwork. So that's a sort of big aspect. Now, team formation, diversity of teams is important. And let me just address the 2 specific issues. I had written a whole chapter about interdisciplinarity and multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary and cross-disciplinary. And then I threw it out. Okay? As I worked my way, there's a great enthusiasm, and I like it too. I'm part of the National Academy of Engineering's efforts to do collaboration between scientists and artists and designers and engineers and artists. So I'm sympathetic, and I've done some artsy stuff myself. But I have to say, it's fun, but it's not clear what the payoff is. So I began to explore this, and I was a bit, there's a lot of treatises about the wonders of interdisciplinarity, but then sociologist Jerry Jacobs at the University of Pennsylvania wrote a book called In Defense of Disciplinarity, In Defense of Disciplinarity. And he made a reasonable case with some evidence about why disciplines are good. They're clear paths of progress. You know how to get a job. There's an audience for what you write. There's understood criteria for quality, etc. And as I looked into the evidence, mainly bibliometric, the studies that were interdisciplinary or were published in disciplinary journals had, by most measures, lower impact. Fewer citations because there wasn't an established community. There were not clearly accepted problems or quality. So there's an interdisciplinary listserv that I joined and was reading what they were writing to get to understand that message. And I posed the question to them, a series of questions, about interdisciplinarity and the sweet spot. Would you say, I wrote to them, that a computer scientist theoretician working with a computer scientist system builder is interdisciplinary? And they sort of 50-50 said yes and no. How about a computer scientist working with a genome biologist? Yes, that was interdisciplinary. How about a computer scientist working with a choreographer? Oh, yes! There was great enthusiasm. That was a great example of interdisciplinarity. And then I came back with the follow-up question, which is, okay, you're going to help you allocate the money of the National Science Foundation, the taxpayer money. What percentage of the money would you give to the choreographer, computer scientist, or the genome biologist, or the two computer scientists? If you're looking for societal payoffs of increased innovation, discovery, and so on. And pretty much that sort of sunk in that, well, we like the choreographer, but they might get 3 or 5 or 8%. Because it's an interesting idea, let's give it a try, but we really want to put our money with the genome biologist or the two computer scientists because we think those have, and I think that's the right idea. So teamwork shouldn't be just putting people together for the sake of interdisciplinarity, but because the problem you're working on requires different skills. And that's the other thing we have to teach ourselves and our students, is that look at the range of methods that we can apply. We might want to have a big data collection and do machine learning and also do small data qualitative studies and case study methods. We want to get all those perspectives in there. We might want to run a scientific controlled hypothesis testing experiment and a design thinking exercise where we try some things. So getting these different perspectives when it fits the problem is my favorite way. The book has 14 case studies of individuals, organizations that have done these things, and you can look at my dear colleague Rita Colwell, who's the head of the National Science Foundation, had done a study about cholera prevention in Bangladesh. Okay, the spring rains come, it floods everywhere, and the sewage gets into the drinking water. What do? Well, cholera is the problem. The cholera travels in the water, and if you drink the water, that's bad. But it's actually, if you just drink the water, it's not going to kill you. What's going to kill you is the little copepods, 1 millimeter, 2 millimeter little buggies, and they get like 10,000 of the cholera bacteria on the surface of their bodies. So this is what Rita Colwell knew from her science background. And then she goes into design thinking. How do we stop this? Well, you could boil the water, but no, you can't boil the water. There's nothing to boil it with. Okay, it's all flooded. And she looks and thinks about what you could do. Well, the women have saris made of cotton. And if you fold the cotton over 8 times and pour the water through them, you'll see the copepods collect on the cotton. The cotton's not fine enough to trap the bacteria, but it traps the copepods. And if you look in the water below, it's noticeably cleaner. And that turned out to be a good idea. Then she engineeringly designs a plan to collect the data from hospitals about how many cholera patients. She goes into 19 villages, trains them in the public health approaches to doing this, and you don't just do this once, you have to do this every time you drink the water, right? So there's a lot of training to be done, and she designs a training program, okay? And I think she fruitfully combines science, engineering, design. She runs this in 19 villages and gets no significant difference. But that's the design and refinement iterative process. She goes back, full scale, 65 villages with a whole team that goes out there, refine their training methods, get better data collection, and she nails it. 48% reduction in cholera deaths, okay? And this is a study with 133,000 people that produced real benefit during the time of the study and produces a great result that's highly influential. She just recently got her 59th honorary PhD and travels around the world collecting these wonderful honors that are much deserved. So that's the story I love, and there are lots of other, Group Bell Labs, Google's hybrid model of research, Fraunhofer Gesellschaft, all have variations. Arizona State University all have a variation on this. Okay, so teamwork will get you these different skills. And the big advocacy, as I said, I threw out the chapter interdisciplinary, but I put it back in as a section on teamwork. But the major section is working with civic, business, and global partners. It turns out, if you want to do great work, work on real problems. Where do you get real problems? You get them from industry, you get them from governments, you get them from NGOs and other groups. And so I began to develop that theory that working together was possible. The National Academy of Engineering and Sciences runs something called Government, University, Industry Research Roundtable to develop the ideas of how that works together. And they spun off 5 years ago the University Industry Demonstration Partnerships, which brings university people together with industry to find ways to work together, to overcome the very serious problems of data privacy, of corporate needs for protection of their information, of the rights for research. So when universities and industries work together, you have to figure out how to do this. You don't want to be the people studying the use of sugar for Coca-Cola, sugary drinks for Coca-Cola, or nicotine or cigarettes for Philip Morris. So there are problems there, and there are problems about sharing the data, working with them, who owns the results. But I don't have a perfect solution, but I try to lay out the ways we've been successful in getting our work done. This morning I talked about how our support from Oracle, Adobe, Leidos, and other companies that led to our, and I see industry as a real partner. They're the only ones who have the scale to actually make a difference in a substantive way. Not I should say, government and industry and other, civic partners. Okay, then the methods of testing with prototypes and realistic interventions became really important. Interventions, not experiments, okay? And, this became a governing phrase for me, that you wanted to get past the laboratory thinking into the real world. And finally, then you get it, you want to promote the adoption of your results and measure the impact. And that's maybe the most fresh ideas that I contributed in this chapter about the way social media, how much Twitter time and Facebook time and how much YouTube should you do. Should you push for a Wikipedia article? I was pushing Gary for him to have his Wikipedia article, and how you weave these things together. And those are becoming important. So there's some lessons there and some evidence. Evidence is pretty nice that for the Journal of Medical Internet Research, they did a study that the number of tweets and retweets and mentions in the first 3 days after a paper is on the web is a good predictor of the 2 years out citation counts. So yeah, it does, those papers may be good anyway, but it's certainly a good idea to spend 10 minutes a week, twice a week, to tweet things that you find important or tweet your own work, and maybe write a blog post occasionally, or a public op-ed for the New York Times or the Washington Post or other places, or the IEEE. So those things became important. And then The social ways. There's a wonderful, the good librarians at Washington University St. Louis, the Becker Library, have the Becker model about impact. It's a 16-page, single-space thing that lists all the ways research can have impact. And there's a growing awareness, for example, that not just papers and citation counts, but impact in changing practice in the world, changing education. Your work is mentioned in textbooks, etc. And things like patents. 45 leading universities, Maryland included, I'm not sure about UNC, have changed their tenure rules and their promotion rules to include patents with equal force of papers. Okay? So there's, you know, a shift that's going on, and I think those are positive things. Now here's one idea that among the fresh ideas. It's called Send 5 and Thrive. Send 5 and Thrive. And it's a 2-paragraph section of the book. You might enjoy that. But the suggestion is to show you how different ways of thinking. You've just finished a paper. I do this with my students. You've just finished a paper with your students, okay? And it's been accepted for publication. You have 2 weeks to revise and submit the final version. You go to your students, you say, you know, take a look at our paper, look at the references, and find the 5 most important people who have contributed to this area of work that we've already cited. And I want you to find their emails and send them a note, a personal note. It's about a half-hour commitment. And I want here's the note. Dear superstar professor, I am a PhD student working with Gary Marcianini at the University of North Carolina. He sends his regards. We're completing a paper that will be final version published in 2 weeks. And we have 2 questions for you. 1, have we been fair in describing your contribution to this research? 2, have you written anything more recently that we should also cite in this paper? Okay? I will bet you that you get 80% response within 48 hours. From even superstar professors at Oxford or Beijing, you know, or wherever it may be, you will get an answer because that kind of note really strikes to them. They want to know who's referencing and building on their work. They want to, if you say, give me a new paper to reference, that's a kind of gift, even for senior professors, you know, who have lots of citations, okay? Now, my students looked at me the first time and said, oh my gosh, I can't do that. Our paper says, you know, look at the paper and look what they wrote. It says, you know, they say, the work of superstar professor failed to do X, Y, Z. We rectify this grievous omission. Yeah? Well, you know, that one's fortunately easy to fix. It just shows an attitude change because then you have to rewrite the paper which says, superstar professor's pioneering work can be productively extended by the work of this paper. Okay? And that's your smiley because it rings true. I find so many papers have a negative spin in condemning previous work rather than showing I'm a member of a community. I thank these pioneers who did some work 5, 8, 10, 15 years ago. And of course they couldn't be as, you know, they couldn't see all the implications, but that's the way it goes. So Send 5 and Thrive is a simple, low-effort way to reach out, make yourself known to others, get your work to be read by the top people in the world, and they'll cite you then, make friends, they'll invite you to come speak, and all those good things will happen. All right? And that's the shift I want. I want students to think when they get to be a PhD student at UNC, they are a member of a research community in a worldwide way, and they should stand up proudly and, you know, be engaged with the leaders of the field. The Becker University librarians also have a website with 47 ways to spread your news about your work. It's very good. You can't do them all. You never have time for anything else, but choose the ones you want, and especially things like getting out, which is why I like to get out and talk to people. Getting out and talking to others is probably the best way. And, you know, if you have to learn to do that, my students have to learn to speak, they have to learn to write, they have to learn to write slides, make videos, and communicate effectively. That chapter also was very much influenced the best way to promote adoption of your work is write great papers. Write clear, lucid papers that really tell the story. And there's a bunch of great books that influenced me about how to do that. Okay, we're sort of coming to the end. The goal is the twin win, solutions and theories that are powerful and strong. And I think, this, I hope, is a way that makes some sense. The last two chapters of the book talk about how to make this happen at your campus and how to change the research ecosystem at the National Science Foundation, at leadership of universities. It's a difficult road, not easy to accomplish, but hey, we got time. Another 50 years, we might get there. And I think, we have immense problems to deal with, but the capabilities that students have and young researchers, the skills, the tools, communication, give me great hope that actually they can make a difference and work on these really wicked large problems. And that's where we're going. So I sort of come to an end here, and thank you. I'll take questions, but I'll just say thank you very much for your attention and your interest thus far. We can go more into talking about teamwork or about adoption and impact, but I much prefer the questions. I think audiences where we have a discussion get us going much better. Yeah. Yes, thank you, Ming.
So how would you regard HCI? Is it science, engineering, or design? Or all about
A design?
How would you regard HCI?
Well, I do think it's this, there is a science, a theory. There's a struggle to make theories. In redoing the 6th edition, I did the chapter on the theories, and it was quite interesting about how they've evolved. I would say maybe there's one comment I like in that. There's what I call the micro theories of HCI, which are the much more traditional ones, little things that you can study in a 1-hour laboratory study, how long it takes to click on something or spot something or do something. But there's the macro HCI, which is the study of persuasion, of change, of how people adopt, adapt, reject over weeks and months. For those, you can't run controlled studies. So there is a science to HCI, a growing one. There's an engineering discipline, and there's a recognition. The 6th edition has 2 new chapters on design because we needed to add a lot more about the methods of design where they were described. We talked about usability testing, expert reviews, but the method of design thinking is better described in this 6th edition.
Great, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
I think I missed something when you were talking about interdisciplinarity teams and how to pull together a team when one of the aspects that's promoted is the fact that you don't know what someone might bring to the team that could lead to a breakthrough. So,
Well, you better have a clue of what people you want on the team and what skills and knowledge. I guess you give me the perfect introduction about teamwork. Here we go. So maybe, there's a few set of rules about how to form teams, okay? Those would, a good way to find good team members are people who have been successful part of teams in the past. It's sort of a little bit ironic, but that's the literature does show that having people who know how to work in teams is good. Then the balanced teams, diverse skills, okay, and the ones that are relevant to the problem. Diverse ages helps, older and younger. Gender, men and women, okay, because they bring different ways of working, are important, and different personalities. And one of the things, I've worked with Catherine Plaisance, my collaborator, for more than 20 years. We have 90 papers together. And that's been very fruitful. It's not a quiet thing. We vociferously disagree. She brings different perspectives, and that's what's helpful. So one person on a team may say, look, the conference deadline is June 15th. We're going to get whatever we can done, and we'll submit it June 15th. And the other person says, wait a minute, this is important. We have to get this done right, and we'll submit it when we're ready. Okay, and that's a fruitful way of getting deeper into the problem and decide what is it that we need to get ready? What is it that we want to publish? Why are we such a rush, Those kind of differences are helpful. So personality, complementary personalities are a good idea. And maybe this goes back to the industry connection. while I was working on this and desperately looking for evidence to support things, I attended the ACM Knowledge Discovery and Data Mining Conference. Pretty rigorous, hot conference these days. It got 1,036 papers submitted, of which they accepted only 140. Pretty tough entry. Each paper gets 3 reviews. And the analysis showed this wonderful little gift for me, that the papers that had co-authors from industry and government, industry and universities, excuse me, had statistically significantly higher ratings than those that were all academic or all industry. That was really sweet. Since then, I've gotten other evidence from Elsevier. They've done similar analysis and find the same result. So why does that matter? I would say the industry partnership brings you a real problem that people care about, that matter, and fresher perspective from theory. Together, and testing it in the living laboratory of the real world gives you a more credible result and a better theory. That's my reading of those things. Okay? So I think there's ways to think about composing the teams. I guess just, this collaboration readiness. Do people know how to use shared documents, shared data, Skype and other kind of things? Have they worked remotely where necessary? And then you may need experienced leaders, and experienced leaders know a few things. They know how to assemble a team, how to inspire people who are weaker, how to create balanced discussions. Teams that are effective tend to have more equitable participation. Some teams have the extreme position that nobody can speak twice till everyone has spoken once. It's a kind of strong way. But the teams that have balanced discussions are better. So I get worried when somebody doesn't talk at all, and I want to make sure I pay attention to that. Okay? And just, the management, so getting clear roles and goals. I mean, I don't like to be part of a group where say, well, we'll just talk and we'll have a meeting. If the goal is a meeting, I'm out. If there's no agenda for the meeting, I'm doubly out. So I want to know what we're there for, what we're going to accomplish, how do we know when we're done? Can we end early? If there's no leadership that moves it along, it's not a team for me. Okay? Now, in my classes, I have these 2 rules, 2 teaching strategies, trying to make it simple for my students. Who does what by when? Who does what by when? And a commitment that says, Susan will do the first draft of the design by 6 p.m. on Tuesday, and Mohammed will reply by noon on Thursday with a critique. Hour by hour, not, I'll do it this weekend, but by noon on Saturday. A very specific who does what by when, and breaking it down into small problems. And then the good communication skills about listening, speaking, and writing. Okay, regular and open discussions. Our event flow group meets every Thursday at 2 o'clock. And that way everybody knows without sending emails or so on that if it's meeting Thursday at 2, Wednesday, you better send your draft of your whatever you want out to everybody, and then we'll talk about it on Thursday. Okay, and then if people can't make it, they can't make it. But, there's a kind of regular thing, so you don't have to spend a lot of energy scheduling. Let's all do a doodle pool about when our next meeting is. No, let's move on. Let's talk about content, not form. All right? And the right kind of brainstorming strategies, and then administrative resources and services for larger teams. I might say, there's come a book, but there's a great new book out, a bestseller from the National Academy of Engineering, free to download, came out last year. Very nice job about enhancing the effectiveness of team science. I would have liked it, enhancing the effectiveness of team engineering or team design. They meant that, but the word science is still deeply embedded in the research culture in some places, and we're changing that. So there's a lot of resistance to this change. I've gotten pushback and so on. There are people in places where working with industry is seen as somehow lower or less, and I think we're shifting that as universities change their tenure and promotion rules to make it clear. Working with industry is a great idea. John Hennessy, outgoing president of Stanford, I listened to his his talk about what made Stanford such a great success, and he makes a very strong point about the connection with industry. And he ties it back. Leland Stanford in 1880 founded Stanford with the idea that it'd be a university working with the railroads of the time. But Hennessy's interpretation is that, now working, the creation of Silicon Valley in the last 2 decades was a lot because Stanford was engaged. Stanford had a two-way street, back and forth, close collaboration. That made it a winning strategy. So if you want to be, you want to follow that model, it seemed like it's pretty good, okay? And so those are the stories there. I think that was the 2 parents and children, but maybe I should just scoot to the end here and just, there we go. So, my story is applied and basic combined, achieving breakthrough collaborations, analysis based on creativity, actively build connections, and ask bigger questions. That's kind of the punchline. So I think that leaves it, where I want to be. I think you got, I hope the story got across in a clear enough way, and that you'll take a look at the book and put these ideas to work and let me know. So again, thank you very much. I know some people have to go, but we'll be here for the reception. Appreciate it. Thank you.